I'm Agent Morris with the NSA.
There is something real here.
Did you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
And where?
I know the exact locations, and those locations were provided to the Inspector General and from which to the intelligence committees. I actually had people with the first-hand knowledge provide a protected disclosure to the Inspector General. Biologics came to some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Those could represent exquisite new adversary technology.
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
The government is covering up some level of its knowledge and understanding about what some of those things are.
The Soul Foundation, which just announced a new initiative for UFO research and policy.
It's nuts, man. I mean, we're just small-town buds who saw a UFO in the woods. I mean, now we're hanging out with the government.
Wow. What floor were you guys on?
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Anomaly-NOW, straight out of Austin, Texas. This is the live Weekly News Media Roundup for the 501c3 nonprofit Scientific Anomaly Institute, a.k.a. the Anomaly Archives. I'm your host, Miles Lewis. It is Wednesday, August 21st, 2024, and we're going to have a little different show for you tonight. In about 15 minutes, we're going to have our good friend Greg Bishop join us to discuss this past weekend's Society for UAP Studies, SUAPS, having their very first online virtual conference. Actually, I think they just had one before that called the launch of their Limina project, but we'll get into all that in a little bit. And in the meantime, we've got the usual roundup of some items. I did want to, of course, remind folks that you can go to our website, anomalyarchives.org, where you can find out about the new Patreon community and fundraising campaign that we started in June. We have a patreon.com account over at patreon.com/anomalyarchives, where you can join. And every month we're providing an online lecture by a fellow Fortean anomalous speaker. And coming up this Saturday is going to be our good friend Josh Cutchin, going to be presenting on understanding the UFO as a death symbol, SoulCraft, based on his magnificent magnum opus, Ecology of Souls, the massive 3-volume, really, if you count the third book, that's all the endnotes and appendices, over, I think it's 4,200 citations in that book. And if you go to our Patreon, you can find out how to donate and how to get signed up for that project. We'd appreciate your support. And of course, as usual, you can go to flipboard.com and see all the news links. So yes, this is the week that Imminent is no longer imminent. It is out. Lou Elizondo's long-anticipated book is out, and you can find the link to his recent CBS Morning interview. It's about 4 or 5 minutes, I think, maybe 8 minutes. So it's very, very short. Obviously, they can't get into anything too deep, but we've got the link there to the YouTube version of that, and a number of other interesting articles and book reviews and interesting new book awards from the Parapsychology Association. And what's the other one I was going to say? Oh, right. So New York Times has done a piece on Imminent and Lou Elizondo. It's brief, but very interesting. Has been reprinted over at DyNews. That's DNYUZ.com. And you can thus, I'm guessing the article at the New York Times may be behind a paywall, but you can read the article over here at the news. I'm probably mispronouncing that, DNYUZ.com. Meanwhile, we are excited to have received our copies of the BICS essay contest submissions. Billionaire Bigelow, who is so much a part of the modern UFO history, as revealed post-2017, a few years ago formed the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies, BICS, and last year they ran this essay contest where they got over 204 submitted essays, and they awarded funds to the top 3 winners. First place being Jeffrey Mishlove, getting $500,000 for his essay Beyond the Brain, the Survival of Human Consciousness After Permanent Bodily Death. And Pim van Lommel got $350,000 for his second place entry, The Continuity of Consciousness, a concept based on scientific research on near-death experiences during cardiac arrest. And Dr. Leo Ruikby, third prize for $150,000 for The Ghost in the Time Machine. And true to, I believe, the promise made, the books have been put out now into, look at that, it's beautiful, this magnificent volume. And in fact, let's see if I can bring this up. So we have it over here. This thing is so freaking heavy, and it's amazing. It's astounding. Yeah, look at this. Really nicely done volumes. This being volume 3 of the 5-volume set, Proof of Survival of Human Consciousness Beyond Permanent Bodily Death. And wow, yeah, so they got the gold foil trimmed pages, high quality glossy interior with color photographs accompanying it. So no expense spared here. And we are glad. We're very thankful to BICS for sending us, the Anomaly Archives, copies of this fantastic, amazing collection of books on the afterlife. You can find out more about that at bigelowinstitute.org. Of course, we'll have all the links in the show notes. Some other fun stuff coming up. So thank you, Victor, for reminding me that coming up September 1st and 2nd is the completely free virtual conference with over 24 speakers. This is being put on by Ryan Sprague. This is his second Anomacon, and you can find out more about it at the website anomacon.com. That's ANOMACON.com. And looks fantastic as always. A ton of amazing, interesting speakers that you can find the information on over at anomacon.com. And just an amazing lineup. And it's so awesome that this is being made available for free, and is the perfect segue to what we'll be talking about very soon when we discuss the SUAPS, Society for UAP Studies, first annual conference, when our guest Greg Bishop arrives. Some other articles that have come across the newswire that are over at the Flipboard. Dr. De La Torre, The Forgotten Factor, the Psychological Effect of the UAP Phenomenon. Professor Gabriel Torre draws attention to the need to study UAP not only from the physical and technological perspectives, but also through the psychological effects on witnesses. Again, I'm so glad to see this kind of news reporting. This is from a Substack called Sentinel News. Apparently it was originally published in UAP Digital. And some of the quotes here, all of them have a common denominator that focuses on the objects. Objects are enormous interest to both sides. Undoubtedly, understanding these phenomena, which seem to defy our understanding of physics, is a great challenge and holds an interest that goes beyond mere curiosity, as they may represent the greatest enigma in our history. What world power would not be interested in understanding how something, an object, a technology can overcome the current limits assumed for speed, acceleration, invisibility, etc.? It could be a decisive advantage in the strategic field. Therefore, UAP may represent a threat to national security, as has been stated in various forums. Yes, sick of it. But they also present an opportunity for technological advancement, a technological singularity. The article goes on to talk about the psychological factors. In our study, Psychological Aspects in UAP Witnesses, recently published in the scientific journal International Journal of Astrobiology, we precisely focus on the analysis of these psychological variables in UAP witnesses. The study consisted of a series of questions, mostly Likert style, divided into 5 fundamental sections. First, we collected basic information about the participants, 245 volunteers from different countries, including educational level, age, etc., In a second section, we asked several questions about the popular videos of UAPs in the U.S. Navy, which were published and received so much attention. Also included were several questions about the stance of governments and science on this issue. In the third section, we asked questions on the subject of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Many of these questions were related to the different strategies, hypotheses, and theories used by scientists in this field. A fourth section was devoted to UAPs themselves, their characteristics, and origins. The fifth section was only visible to those participants who reported having directly witnessed a UAP sighting or experience, 93 subjects. In this last section, the questions were related to the particular incident, and we emphasized the collection of data and information regarding possible psychological, physiological, or physical sequelae and the evidence they might. So you can check that out over at sentinelnews.substack.com. And like I said, lots of other news items over at our Flipboard. I mentioned the book awards from the Parapsychological Association. There's a new audio series called Marfa for Beginners. It doesn't seem to focus on the UFO aspect, the mystery lights there in West Texas, but it's more about just the peculiarities of the town. I haven't had the chance to listen to that, but I bet it's going to be pretty interesting. Marfa is a very strange place, and this is apparently available at marfapublicradio.org. And it's also known as an art community, but it's, a very small place on the edge of Texas that has light phenomena and this very interesting art community, and has just kind of been an outlier, and there's military bases there. But, well, our friend and a guest for tonight has arrived, and I would like to go ahead and bring on Greg. How you doing?
Can you hear me okay?
I hear you perfectly.
Okay. I'm sitting in the kitchen at my dad's place.
Appreciate you taking the time. You are a very busy fellow, and you're besides of all my friends interested in UFOs, I've probably known you the longest, and you're by far the most active in this field of people I know, and I'm always excited to experience even more vicariously through you and your reports of travels and interactions. It seems like for the last couple of years, you've really been going to a lot of the different events that have emerged post 2017, including, of course, when we saw each other last in that context in 2022 and in Houston at the Rice University, Jeff Kripal's opening of the Archives of the Impossible. Of course, we got to hang out.
It's hot here. Let me get a drink, and I'm listening. I'll be okay. Like 10 seconds. Keep going.
Okay. But I was glad to hang out with you on a personal level. More recently, when I took a brief vacation out to California, and we visited with our good friend Robert Larson, who used to have his own radio show, Out the Rabbit Hole, and before that, Cartoon Pleroma. Of course, you've had your Radio Mysterioso, and before that,
Hungry Ghost,
right. Yeah. So all of us playing around with terrestrial and internet-based radio, scare quotes, communications on these subjects. So I really was glad to see that you got to attend this most recent virtual conference put on by SUAPS, the Society for UAP Studies, headed by Michael Sifone and others. And I was not able to attend this past weekend's events, even though there were lots of presenters and topics that I was very interested in. So when I saw that you'd gone, I really wanted to give you the opportunity to help inform me and the audience about what they may have missed going to that sort of thing. Before we do that, I just want to remind folks that they can go to the Society for UAP Studies.org website. That is where you'll find links to the UAP Studies Conference for the summer 2024 event that we're going to be talking about, where you can see photos and bios and the abstracts of the different presenters. They have links to various Google Docs with their abstracts and bios. And, of course, Greg Bishop is the host of the Radio Mysterioso radio show and podcast, which you can find at radiomysterioso.com. And there's information out there on his being the author of great books like Project Beta on the story of Paul Benowitz, national security, and the creation of a modern UFO myth. and several other books, including I want to say A is for Damsky, but that's just one of the entries.
Oh, that's the name of the book. Yeah.
Okay.
I co-wrote that with Go Rightly. Also, there's the collection of the magazine, Wake Up Down There, and then a collection of a bunch of my essays. That was the last thing that came out, which was called
It Defies Language.
Yeah.
Well,
among other things. And then you and I are both in the Reframing the Debate book.
Indeed. And so in one of your recent blog posts, you were commenting about how happy you were to see this event or in more events like it because of it being a much more, not a traditional UFO conference, a truly an academic conference. So much so that I suspect the average UFO conference goer would not necessarily have found it as interesting as you or I, but to me, it is the important kind of thing.
Yeah.
Did you get to attend virtually most of it?
Probably half to 3/4 of it. I took notes on some of the stuff that I saw or listened to and saw. And the thing I put up originally on the Rada Misterioso Facebook was that it was, what am I trying to say? Like maybe 10 years ago or something, I was talking to people on my show and maybe writing about this. And I said, at some point, science is going to change and it's going to start looking at this. And I don't know if it'll be in our lifetimes or what. But when that happens, ufology will have to, as we know it, will change. And the people that are, I mean, there'll always be an audience for the type of conference where you have, and not to put him down or anything, but you have people like Stephen Greer and the stars of this thing like Linda Howe and Richard Dolan and even Whitley and people like that. That's going to split off, and how there's going to, I said at some point there's going to be scientists and people with degrees and all that looking into this, and it happened. It's happening now. And what Mike Sifone and the Society for UAP Studies are trying to do is basically figure out, okay, this is happening. What do we do with it? How do we deal with this subject? How do we become interdisciplinary about it? And to his credit and to the society's credit and their board, they're not just having hard scientists and physical scientists, they're also having social science, anthropology. They haven't brought in the arts yet, but I'm trying to push that on Mike and see what happens. And I don't have a doctorate in anything, so I don't know if I can be on their board or anything. Not that it matters, but that stuff is coming. So something that I've wanted to see for quite a while now. It's like let's get people with degrees and positions at universities and positions in academia to look at this. That's happening now. And that stigma that people used to think, it's still there, but that stigma of somebody with a doctorate in anything, even talking or mentioning UFOs, that's falling away. I mean, it used to be just a few people like Valet and Brenda Densler who actually opened up she had the keynote address, or even more recent people like Jeff Kripal and Diana Pasulka. These people are, I just got a message from one of the people that presented at the conference because I'm having an ongoing conversation. Because, I mean, I really want to find out, and this is a younger person, a person that's, just getting into this. And I think that in the future that this will grow. We'll have a little bit more conversation about it. I've already heard at this conference and others, like the SCU conference in Huntsville, I've already heard things that I've never heard before, where people are actually asking questions about the UFO subject. And then even most importantly to me, what I'm interested in is they're asking questions about how do we ask questions? How do we look at things? How do we put things in categories? And how does that affect, we've got to look at, and this is really interesting to me, we've got to look at what we think is, we're not unassociated from this. We're not unassociated from anything. We look at everything through a human lens and through a cultural lens and all that. But nobody's really talked about that yet, not very much. And now it's really starting to get talked about. And that to me is wonderful and fascinating. Let me grab my notes here and look.
Oh, just, some of the speakers I just happened to have reported on in previous week's shows. This Gretchen Stallman is one of the presenters, and we had reported on this article from, again, Sentinel News, an analysis of the scientific literature on UAPs from 1967 to 2023. And it was very interesting, encouraging work. And her background as a library science person and how to collect large amounts of data, how to manage data was very encouraging. And then on a previous show, I mentioned, made a reference to this Maya Cowan being interviewed by the guy from the APEC group, which is all about, advanced alternative engineering and UFO propulsion, who was interviewed at that Huntsville conference you were just mentioning. And she was another presenter at this recent SUAPS conference.
Yeah, her lecture was Observatories and Experiencers, and it was centered around an experience she had as a observer or observer participant I guess a group went to an observatory, set up a whole bunch of monitoring equipment, and had a psychic there at the same time. And the psychic freaked out and said, I can't remember if it was male or female, but saying, I'm feeling like the most frightening, bad feeling that I've ever had, and I can't explain it. And at the same time, coincidentally, with the quotes, the person monitoring all the equipment said, there's a signature here, something in infrared. The instruments are picking up something, but nobody could see anything.
Wow.
So it was, you can say, how many times can you say that's a coincidence? Because, and what's coincidence? It's just a word it's been used as a word to kind of hand wave something away. Whereas if you look at it in terms of like a synchronicity or what is the meaning there when two things like that happen? You don't even have to acknowledge that it's something weird or a UFO or anything like that. But the fact that somebody who's describing something going on, at least intuitively, and somebody seeing something on instruments at the same time, which are supposedly not affected by such things, they're just monitoring the environment. And I'm not sure. I think it would have been if the psychic person was looking at the instruments at the same time, it would have been a non-starter. But it happened independently. I believe the psychic was separately from the instrument, so they were monitoring what was going on with these two different things. And that I've met people. Actually, I met a group of younger people that are inventing new and testing new monitoring equipment, like that monitors infrared and ultraviolet and movement, and then the software to try and determine whether that movement. And this has been developed over years, and other people have done it. The UAPX people were using equipment designed by the same guy that designed Chris O'Brien's San Luis Valley Project monitoring equipment. But they're trying to design equipment that not only does that, but actually looks at, like I said, infrared, but also looks at ultraviolet. And nobody's really thought of that. And I asked the guy that had invented it, that was working on it, I said, why infrared and ultraviolet? He says, we want to look at blue and red shift when things move quickly away from the camera, towards or away from the camera, and see if we can determine the speeds by that. And it has to be very fast. It apparently has to be moving straight away or straight towards the sensor to have it be something that they can use. I don't know what the physics of that are, but they're working on that, and also working on trying to correlate this with trying to attract the phenomena and then monitor what's going on. Not just putting the stuff out in an area where there's a lot of activity, but actually having people on site trying to attract it for various means. And so to me, this is fascinating that these people in their 20s are doing this. I kind of sat around and talked to them after the Huntsville conference. And I said, geez, once you get it going, or if you have it going, please tell me. I'd like to, be there and talk to you and see what's going on. And I have no expertise in anything, but since I've been around for a while, they figured it was interesting to talk to me, I guess. But that's fascinating to me. And at the other side of this was at this SUAPS conference this weekend. So what I want to say about, I interrupted you if you wanted to say something. I was going to describe Brenda Densler a little bit.
Oh, yeah, please. I was just going to say, I've been listening to the SCU's new podcast, Anomalous Review, and I just finished listening to the first 3 episodes. And, you know, they're one of the new organizations that's had some really good, again, more academic, science-based conferences that we've referenced. And Kevin Knuth, I believe, is one of the speakers at the SUAPS conference, I think. Maybe I'm...
Yeah, he was. He did collaboration on the stuff he'd done at SCU a couple of times.
And I just finished listening to his podcast, and some of what you were just talking about, the sensor arrays that he's developing with UAPX and with other projects. Yeah, he was talking about all the different arrays and the sound aspect like you're describing and looking for redshift. He went into great detail and also talked about, I think, some of what he's talked about at this lecture, which is his modeling of kind of like the more simulation of the Drake equation in a sense of
yeah, it's a kind of a more practical application of it. Not even the Drake equation, but more like how long would it take a civilization to arise? How long would it take them to get to interstellar travel? And he just talks of it in terms of interstellar travel at sublight speed, nothing with wormholes or anything like that. He said, let's use it in terms of physics we understand.
Yeah.
And because of, I think, general relativity, I'm not even going to describe it because I will sound stupid, but everybody understands that there is a time dilation when you travel near the speed of light. That's been experimentally proven, whereby, the ship time, the person traveling on the ship is going to experience time differently than the people they left behind. So what Kevin described, he described this on my show, like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago. When I first learned about it, I was like, Kevin, you got to come on my show and talk about this. And he's elaborated on these since then. But what he says is, if you don't care about coming back to where you left and you just become a spacefaring civilization, you can travel across the galaxy a few times in a human lifetime. And you can go to these places that are, you can go to the nearest star in like 3 days. This is not accounting for acceleration and deceleration and all that. And he talks about, at 1G acceleration, which is great for us, what happens? How far can you get and how long? And at 1G, you keep accelerating. So you're going faster and faster and faster and faster. When you get to the end, you have to slow down. But he said, not taking into account that, somehow they get around those accelerations and decelerations. How long would it take to get from one star to another, or one end of the galaxy to another? And it's well within a human lifetime to do that a few times. And it also kind of meshes in with Mike Masters' idea about time travelers. And if somebody's traveling that fast, if they a week to them is 10 or 15 years to us, depending on how fast they're going and all that. And so, somebody could come back and be like, oh, here's a week later. And now it's 50 years later. What are these beings doing here? How have they advanced? And in that way, with the current physics, you could model an extraterrestrial civilization actually visiting us. But they would not have a home planet anymore. Their home planet would be what they're traveling in. They'd basically just be on a boat and just sail forever. Every once in a while pulled into a port, and then pulled into the port like a week later or a year later and see what happens, that kind of thing. But I was just fascinated by that modeling of interstellar travel and what that would be like and how long that would take and what it would do to, a biological entity and all that. So he even went into, uploading, personalities into machines, which can stand accelerations much further. Like it can get, I think, 30G or something like that before the equipment we have now starts to be affected adversely. So, it can get very granular, but overall, he will explain things as a scientist and as a physicist, showing his equations, but he's like, okay, what this means is, and he's very open to explaining these ideas to non-physicists and non-scientists and mathematicians, so that we can understand what he's talking about. And that,
and it's not.
Yes, he's a very nice person. He's a saintly person,
Exactly. Exactly. And
I consider him a friend, and he's so clear about what he says, and so he's a very empathetic person.
Yeah. And just seems well-rounded. So like as much as that version of interest in UFOs is so specific and one line of thought, he has a lot of other areas of interest that he can expound on too. But you were about to start talking about Brenda Densler.
I have a few notes about what she said. I mean, I was just sitting there taking it in and going, oh my God, this is like stuff we've been talking about, our friends have been talking about, and other things that we haven't for years. And she's been doing this for years. She wrote one of the first books by a academic on the UFO subject. What was it called? Do you remember the title? You switched to me.
Yeah, I did. Sorry. It's The Lure of the Edge.
That's right. When did that book come out? In the 90s or 80s?
2001, I believe.
Oh, really? Okay. It seems so long ago. But anyway,
yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, just one version of the origin story for the Archives of the Impossible that I heard spoken publicly by Diana Pasulka involved when Brenda, I think, was facing her mortality due to health issues and had given her library of materials to Diana. And then I think that's kind of that. And of course, Kreipel talking about Vallet's collection. So those were some of the core collections. So yeah, again, this invisible
letters, all went into starting the Archives of the Impossible.
So these invisible colleges are becoming more visible.
Yes, very much so. Yeah, she said, I mean, a few of the takeaways from her talk. She said the UFO subject is easy to falsify or make fun of, which is what's held it back for so long, especially with academics. But as time went on, she said, and more people look at this, and then I guess the New York Times article, which opened everything up, I think, for good and bad. She said she noticed this for a long time. The materialist worldview is not doing justice to lived experience of witnesses. And so that has to be revised. One thing I thought that she said, which was very interesting, and I really resonated, was what she said was the ETH may have been pushed for intelligence reasons by the government. Like, everybody has an idea it's aliens from another planet. Yes, it's aliens from another planet. Although this time they've been very careful not to say that, which may be some kind of reverse psychology. I don't know. But it makes sense that for the last 70 years or whatever it is, that if people want to think it's aliens coming from other planets, let's build an armature around that to be able to disseminate or deny or whatever kind of information, because then that's a dichotomy people can deal with. They don't have to look at other possibilities. And you can build a mythology around that can be used. As I say, the UFO is a Swiss Army knife for the intelligence community. It can be used for all kinds of things. And at the end, during her talk or at the end, I actually thought of something that sort of riffed on what she was saying. And what I wrote down at the time was, UFOs appear as rhetorical. and that's from our point of view, and maybe from the whatever is causing the UFO's point of view, the only thing we can think as a rhetorical thing, and not some kind of reality, materialist reality as we're used to. That's also why I'm kind of looking at this from the point of view of art and from the arts and from creativity, is that maybe there are ways to look at the UFO that come through that lens. One thing that there was another guy, Wesley Waters from Wellesley College, philosophy department, I believe. The title of his talk was Detection and Characterization. Oh, no, that was another guy. Travis Dumsday from University of Edmonton. The title of his talk was Understanding UAPs, Surveying some Non-Naturalist Viewpoints. And the gist of his talk was, he said, a lot of the UFO talk is, if it's not materialist, which has been most of the talk, it's centered on two different ideas about where it might be coming from, the UFO might be coming from. And one was animist theories. Like if you know what animism is, it's the idea that there's there's an intelligence or a spirit behind everything. Like there's a river spirit that represents the river. But he says there's two kinds of that. There's like the river spirit, like there's like the spirit that jumps around and is like an avatar for the river, or the river itself is its own, intelligence. It represents itself. It's alive and intelligent. So, he said an example of this is connecting the UFO experience to fairy lore and saying that there's parallels between this. He also said that there he is, Travis Dumsday. Something I'd never heard of, but he's a philosopher, Department Chair of Philosophy and Religious Studies. Neutral monism, which I'd never heard of. And I have to look at my notes for this. And neutral monism says that neither mind nor body are truly fundamental. They arise out of some deeper source. And if we understand the relationships between mind and body, and maybe that other source, of course, there's somebody at the door right now. The connections between matter and mind can be better conceptualized. And he actually went into the idea of this what is that connection between mind and matter? Instead of saying there's mind and there's matter, or there's spirit and there's like material, what is the connection between mind and matter if we get ourselves out of that duality? And he actually brought up information theory, and I did not know this. Bertrand Russell, the philosopher, thought that had an idea that everything arose out of pure information, kind of like that. I can't think of the physicist. The it from bit. John Archibald Wheeler. Yeah. But nobody has ever has described what the substructure is between mind and matter and how it works. And he said that's kind of a problem that has to be worked on, and it might have some relevance to the UFO question, because UFO seems to exist. A lot of the stuff that goes on seems to exist at this crossroads between mind and matter, and it is neither. Just like Keith Thompson says, it's neither religion nor science. It's kind of both and neither at the same time. So that talk actually fascinated me, and I'd like to talk to him more. You should have him on your show. I should have him on my show when I bring it back. But yeah, there were Wesley Waters talked about characterization of UAP using ground-based observations and satellite imagery. So basically, he's saying, let's take all of our ground-based stuff, the detectors we were talking about, see what we can find with that, and then go to satellite imagery and see what was going on at the same time. If we detect something and we can see it, or we can't see it with visible light, what does satellite imagery tell us? And also, integrating that with information from the national air, from world airspace, but the national airspace here in the United States. Because right now, everything is tracked. Everything is tracked very specifically with something called ADS-B, which is a system that uses a GPS to track everything that's in the sky. And planes are actually, all aircraft are required to have this in their, as part of their instruments now, that communicate. So you don't even need radar anymore. It tells you where everything, that has a transponder, that tells you where everything is, so you can weed out possible, misidentifications of conventional aircraft or even unconventional aircraft, something that has a ADS-B on it. But as I told friends of mine, they said, what are these conferences like? And I said, a lot of the talks are really boring. They're dealing with data, how to parse data, how to categorize it, how to get rid of normal data, like, that's an airplane, or that was a bird, or that was a bug in front of the camera. Matthew Vegas, who's with UAPX, also talked about this. And what algorithms do we use? What AI do we use to start sifting through all that stuff? And if you talk to most people that go to a UFO convention, they go, that's so boring. That, who cares about a bunch of numbers? I really do care about, I might not care about going into the weeds of it, even though I did listen to all these lectures. I did not go to sleep during one lecture at the SCU. And a lot of it was just like, here's a case where we've had this, uncorrelated target and the plane saw it. And let's look at the satellite and let's look at one of them talked about the JAL case over the Pacific Ocean near Alaska. Let's look at the radar returns and the radar for that time and what happened then. Instead of just talking the guy saw something, the crew saw something. well, was it something on radar? Turns out there was something on radar, but it didn't correlate to what the guy was talking about only some of the time. Some of the time, the target appeared like 30 miles away from him, and then sometimes it appeared right next to the plane, like an uncorrelated target. So even the apparently, if I remember this right, even the radar did not return something that wasn't anomalous. It was anomalous radar returns too. So as they get more and more into the hardcore data on this, and more into how can you use, how can you look at your data to start seeing what might be going on with hard data. You can't just do this with old methods anymore. There's so much data, and it has so many issues with it that you have to get AI in there to start parsing through this data and teaching it how to pull out what is important to you. And it's a back and forth. I mean, if you've ever used AI, it's like a conversation. It's like having a conversation with your data, and that's valuable. I think Valet, I did talk to him in the last few months, and he said, I cannot believe how lucky I am to be living at this time where I can actually do something where I don't have to hire 15 people. Mm-hmm. He says, I can go in with all my data and just start asking questions and paring it down to any parameter I want to use. And he said he was absolutely flabbergasted and thankful that he's like, I lived long enough. We were all talking about this in the 60s, and I lived long enough where it actually can be used. And so he said, at Saul, he actually said, for the rest of my research career, I'm going to concentrate on all the weird, outside the box, anomalous data, because I can do that now, and I can do it effectively. So that's that gives you hope when somebody that's been around that long, that has that kind of knowledge, is saying this is a new world, this is a new
day. Yeah, and he laid so much of the groundwork for all that too. But I mean, punch cards. He used to to use punch cards for his database.
Yeah, it's on. He's got a punch card on our the tarot card.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a punch card, but on the punch card, the little holes are punched out, so it says SRI. There was another. Speaking of French scientists, actually, this is a French philosopher, and you know who he is, Miles. You knew who he was before I did. Yeah, there's Matt Sestegas. We'll talk about Bernard Mehus in a moment, but Sestegas, there's Maya. I talked to him at SCU, and I told him my idea about all big UFO groups should be done away with, or at least be broken into smaller groups. And he said, "Oh my God, that's what we've been trying to do." And we weren't talking. We were kind of talking cross purposes till he heard me say that, and then he was very excited about that, because that's basically what what UAPX is. Let's find a small group of very, very focused and talented people to work on one problem for a while and do it to death, and then share that information with everybody. And that's basically what's happening now, which is wonderful. So yeah, and Matt's doing that. Him and Kevin Knuth are on the same team for UAPX.
Fantastic.
Bertrand Meheust, Meheust. Bertrand. There he is. He is a philosopher, independent researcher, and steering committee, l'Institut Métaphysique International, Metaphysical Institute. Yeah, he's the one that wrote that. He wrote a book that I think of the 60s, 70s, comparing UFO, the history of the UFO, to science fiction. Not saying that science fiction, UFOs are science fiction, but saying, why do we have parallels here? And it wasn't obvious, like, well, people thought of this stuff and then it showed up as UFO stuff. No, it wasn't direct like that. I don't know that book. I haven't read that book, but I listened to his lecture. You know what? Let me read some of the takeaways from the lecture, some of the things he said. The world is not psychophysical, but purely physical. The deepest thing we know about UFOs is their elusiveness. Oh, and he says at the beginning, and he had a very heavy French accent, so I was getting all these valet vibes off of him. He said, I want to break with the engineer's paradigm. I think he means the materialist scientist paradigm. Then the best thing we can do is abandon all presuppositions about the UFO phenomenon when we do that. the language of physics is inadequate to describe the phenomenon. And he said, as I go forward with this, and as he's been doing, he says, I plan to concentrate. This is exactly what Valet said. I plan to concentrate on the stranger aspects, the strangeness aspects, like an insect boring its way into its prey or its food. And he said this all in a very heavy French accent. I want to concentrate on all of the phenomenological aspects, the structure of experience. If you know what phenomenology is, it's basically studying how people look at things and what are the nature of those things. How do we perceive a thing? Oh, also, he had been involved with a lot of parapsychology and the study of parapsychology, and he compared that study to the behavior of phenomena in parapsychology and in ghost hunting and all that to the UFO, which, a lot of us have noticed in the past. But he was saying, in the same way you just say, screw it, I give up, and you turn off all your instruments, bang, that's when the ghost appears. And Massimo Teodorani has said the same thing. He says, as soon as I turn off the instruments, then then everything will start. Like, we'll turn off the camera and then bang, all the anomalous light stuff starts happening when we're packing up. And finally, what Dr. Mayos said, and I totally agree with, and it was so amazing to hear somebody say this so eloquently, an excess of protocols and preparation kills the signal. So
wing it.
Yeah. How do you get around that? How do you, this is what these younger people are trying to do, and other people have tried too, with calling in the phenomenon or calling it up or perturbing it in some way so that it shows up.
Induce liminality. Induce some form of liminality, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. The last guy that spoke was from Russia, originally, Alexei Golubev. He talked about the history of ufology or UFO study in the Soviet Union during the Cold War and how it was. It's funny because it sounded like exactly like here in a lot of ways. Very materialist. It was made fun of. In fact, people that were studying the UFO subject in Russia at the time they got the equivalent of like the what's the award at MIT for like really stupid research? I can't remember. No, not Darwin Award. It's some other award. But MIT has one. They like find the dumbest, weirdest scientific research in the last year, and they award people. It's like why do you want to know? Just obvious things. Why do people listen to loud music or whatever? But they had an award like that, and people working on UFOs won that award multiple times. Because one, it didn't fit in with the materialist paradigm, and two, it didn't fit in with the ideological paradigm of the USSR at the time to even acknowledge that UFOs existed. But the funny thing was, and I think I talked to David about this, David Metcalf, who actually was one of the people on he was on the social science committee that met. He said at the time, and this is what Dr. Golubev was talking about, at the time people in the Russian government, officials were saying there was a nuclear missile gap. They thought that the United States were studying UFOs and the paranormal and psychic stuff, and that the Russians were behind. And they're like, we got to catch up with the Americans. And that's exactly what a lot of Americans thought, that we're doing the same thing.
Right.
Because of the non-communication and the Cold War and the fear. Both sides thought the others were like boring real deep into UFOs and the paranormal, and they weren't really. And the only reason they were doing any of it was because they were scared the Soviets were, and the Soviets were scared the Americans were. And it wasn't as widespread as either of them thought. The weapons, yes. I mean, they were just, the weapons were being built like mad. But there was a UFO and psychic gap too, or at least a perceived one.
There's been a lot of interesting stories over the years about that, from, of course, the classic Psychic Discoveries Behind the Iron Curtain book, and Hal Puthoff and others talking about, and I think actually Ed May at the 2022 Archives of the Impossible opening was talking about when Glasnost came to the remote viewing field, and the two different nations, RVers got together and
Yeah, they're like, hey, wait, you guys were doing the same thing. Sorry, I'm going to start some food here.
All right. Yeah, I know we're going to have to let you go in just a few minutes. And before I forget, I know...
Thanks for letting me blab all on and on.
Oh, that's why you're here, man. On Bertrand Mahust, I was going to say, I was telling you off air that, I was completely unaware of him until having read Kripal's Authors of the Impossible, which, of course, inspired the Archives of the Impossible. And I was just amazed and fascinated by him as this amazing person. I did not realize he was still alive. And so when I saw that he was speaking as a keynote presenter, I just was fascinated by that. And I think he is, I believe, old friends with Vallée, not least, of course, because they're both French countrymen.
Totally makes sense hearing.
And like you said, his interest in parapsychology being one of the things that Kripal reported on a lot in that book. But man, yeah, so many other fantastic presenters, I'm sure, at this.
Yeah, we missed a bunch of them. But yeah, these are the highlights, at least for me, from the people I actually listened to, where I actually listened to their talks.
And I'm going to, in the show notes, I'll post a link to the SUAPS YouTube channel, because I believe they had done a previous online event, and I believe after a period of time they put that stuff up for others to see, I think. So hopefully they'll continue that.
Everything was recorded. I mean, I actually went back and watched a little of it today just to kind of refresh myself.
And did you get to interact? Did you interact with people between the sessions? I think they had breakout networking.
I think they did, but I didn't because I was trying to do other stuff. It's like, I'm just going to watch the lectures and I'm going to come back. And plus, if I really wanted to talk to somebody, I will just, I'll either get somebody that knows them or email them. And if I have something relevant to say, I'll just say, I'd like to talk to you. So, because strangely enough, at SCU, I talked to Russ Coldhart for 15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And there was no way I would be able to talk to him unless I was there in person. And, whatever you think about him and what opinion you have of him, I sat down and talked to him, and he answered all my questions, and he was really polite. He has no reason to talk to me, so big points to him for them.
Yeah, one of our assistants was just asking me if I'd heard any of this new scuttlebutt about Majestic 12, and I was like, oh, only that I know Ross Coulthard's been talking about it, and, roll my eyes. But there's always some new interesting stuff, even if it's a rehash of the classic.
Did you hear this? Yeah, somebody disproved that about 100 years ago. Right. But you never know. There might be new information. Somebody put up, I think, on one of the forums on Facebook, just said, look at this documentary about secrecy in the UFO subject. It was about Benowitz, and it said he committed suicide. It's like, no, he didn't.
That's actually something I want to talk to you about after the show, really briefly.
Okay.
But yeah, well, folks can go to societyforuapstudies.org, and we'll, of course, put the links in the show notes. We're going to put links to, of course, radiomisterioso.com, and folks can reach Greg through that. And there's a great, amazing back catalog of interviews there that go back forever, practically.
There will be more because I've got a backlog of 8 or 10 shows, and I want to start it up again because there's so many people I want to talk to, So,
any other highlights before we bid you adieu from the conference?
Not really. It's just that, like I said at the beginning, what these guys are trying to do, Mike Sifoni and his board, is we've got a problem here. It can be a scientific problem. So let's see. And a social science problem. It can be a problem that it can be looked at by academia and science. And how do we, they're trying to forge that. They're actually trying to make a new ufology, which is great.
Well, thank you for joining us, Greg. And thank you all for tuning in or listening to the rebroadcast. We'll be back next week. And of course, please visit our patreon.com/Anomaly Archives. We've got Joshua Cutchin lecturing on his fantastic Ecology of Souls multi-volume this weekend, Saturday. That's available to Patreon members of a certain tier or higher. And we'll be back next week. Talk to you soon. Greg, stay right there, and I'll talk to you in just a second, okay?
Thank you.